Welcome back, friends, to the Guaranteed Analysis podcast. We had so much to say last week about raw diets that this week we decided to do a mini-sode, expanding a little bit more on the information that we started last week. So I hope you enjoy this mini-sode and follow this episode or share with your friends. That's really appreciated. So thank you.
So raw, and again, we have raw. You got to ask the person. So if an owner comes in to the clinic, first we ask, what exactly are you doing? Because raw can mean very, very different things. Raw can literally mean we had a client. Do you remember this client that was feeding a lamb's head? Literally would go to a butcher and get lamb's heads and throw them in the backyard, and that was the primary source of
I do not
nourishment.
remember this client.
For their pet. And so that's one way of doing raw, not one that I would recommend. And then there are the people who are, it was a bad idea. I mean, also from we're talking about like prion diseases and eating brain matter, and there's a whole lot wrong to unpack there. And I don't often say wrong a lot. I just talked about how we shouldn't say cons because we don't want to. There's a whole lot wrong with feeding.
Sometimes there is. Sometimes there is.
Sometimes there is. Yeah, sometimes there is wrong. That's a whole lot wrong. Are there ways to do raw where we can mitigate the cons or mitigate the risk? Yeah, that's not it. That is as risky and as dangerous and as unbalanced and as unsafe and incomplete as it possibly gets. That's going to cause way more harm than doing good. So we can have the client that's throwing the raw lamb's head in the backyard. We can have the client that is trying to make it at home and grind it up and is adding like bone and, a certain amount of organ meat, and that they're trying to balance it. Maybe they got a recipe from one of these nutritionists. And the other thing that I'm seeing from these nutritionists that are the fake nutritionists, the not real nutritionists, is these diets are crazy complicated. These homemade diets and these raw food diets are insanely complicated. And sometimes the animals actually not doing well on it because it is so complicated. There's so much going on. That body's having to break down so many of these foods to get the nutrients out of the foods they need. We simplify the diet or even sometimes go on a commercial and they do better. And again, it's individual.
Talk about recipe drift. Like complicated like that. The chances of them following a recipe like that is super low. I definitely toss out recipes that are. I look at the recipe and I'm like, oh, you want me to make my own rub and you want me to put in 17 different spices? Yeah, nope,
not happening.
No way.
Happening. Exactly. And I don't know if you remember when we first started to work together, and I always make my homemade clients come back in for lots of rechecks. First step is within quickly to make sure that they're actually preparing the diet appropriately. And then it's
cooking it appropriately.
Yes. And then it's to see if the animal's doing well on it and are they still cooking it appropriately. And I can remember saying, I say to everybody that I work with, that's a technician or assistant, go in there and have them give you step by step everything that they're doing. And the clients will always try to say, well, it's what you're doing. It's what you're cooking. It's what you've told us to do. Okay. Pretend like I didn't give it to you. Pretend like I'm not the one who gave it to you.
Pretend I don't even know what you're talking about.
Step by step what you're doing. And usually I would say 85% to greater are omitting one or more major step. They're not adding the calcium. They're forgetting to cook the rice. And that's why the dog's having diarrhea.
They're adding butter.
They're adding butter instead of
it so that it doesn't stick to the pan.
They're giving a 60% lean pork rather than a pork loin, and that's true. A dog with pancreatitis, which is only going to lead to hospitalization. So 85% or greater time they're not preparing it correctly, and so how many of these clients are doing that as well? So really need to keep them on track. And are they, with the raw food, are they doing a commercial raw? Is it a commercial raw they bought at the store that is APCO compliant? Has that raw food done any sort of safety or testing? No. So not all raw is created equal, just like most fresh is not created equal. So it's really important to pause and ask the pet guardian, why are they doing it? Exactly what are they doing? Explain it to me. And also, if you're the pet guardian, please just give that information to your to your veterinary
Yeah.
professional or your nutritionist so that they understand where you're coming from, exactly what you're doing, so that they can make the best recommendations not only for your pet but for yourself. And with that, what
All
are
right.
some of
We'll
the
go
pros?
in.
Why are people doing it? Why, if it's so bad and awful, and if everyone's, trying to tell you not, you hear a lot not to do it, just don't do it, just don't do it, just don't do it. Well, then why are so many people doing it, Kim?
Yeah.
Why is raw still here?
I mean, there's a lot of the same reasons that people are gravitating towards home cooked. There's a level of control for the ingredients. You can source them. You know where they're coming from. You can get them organic if you want. Um, so that's a pro for this as well. Again, there's also the argument of the it's more palatable. Lots of animals seem to enjoy it. Uh, so those are a couple things. I would say, and like again, I don't want to say that this is a pro and a con. From my experience with talking to people who feed raw, there is a very strong belief that feeding this way, because it is perceived as being the natural, more um, instinctual or whatever way,
Ancestral based. Yeah.
right, to feed ancestral based to feed your pet, that it has more health benefits than feeding other ways. Um, that has yet to be proven
Yep.
scientifically.
It's a logical fallacy. It's appeal to nature, right? Dog's not a
Yeah,
wolf. We'll go through a whole
right,
episode on that, but that's not. People
right,
think it's a pro, but
right. But it to me, have I seen pets do well after being switched to raw? Yeah, I have. Have I seen them do very poorly? Yeah, I have. So I wouldn't say it's a pro or a con. It's done there, like all things can be done right or wrong, but that's one of the reasons that people gravitate towards this is that belief. Um, it also can come in different kinds of options, which is appealing from a commercial standpoint. So they can come in freeze dried raw, frozen raw, fresh raw. There's even some kibble companies that do like a raw spray on it. So, sometimes I feel like raw is also just a marketing term. Um, and people, because of this belief that it is healthy
mm,
and good for your pet, yeah, maybe they're still feeding that commercial diet, but there's raw freeze dried chunks in it, or raw spray, which I don't even know what that means, if I'm being honest, when I see like coated in raw. You want to, do you know, like, what's that, Danielle? Can you
yeah.
explain that
So
a little bit more?
there is some. So the idea is that raw food does contain more bacteria. Hopefully, just good. Maybe not. Hopefully not the bad. If there's good quality control, and there's a kill step being done. And when we do a raw episode, we'll talk more about kill steps and why they're important and why it's important to have them validated. But the spray is thought to add palatability, I think. And also, there were some studies coming out of the University of Helsinki showing that feeding a raw food diet can enhance the microbiome and can provide microbiome diversity. And in these University of Helsinki studies, it was over 10 years that it was data that was collected. It was survey based, so there's always limitations to every study. Survey based studies um, can be problematic, and that they're relying on owner recall and the accuracy of the relaying of information. However, they're a great start. And if well performed, survey studies can be really great. They're just harder to do than a regular kind of retrospective data collection type study. And so it found that dogs, if they were fed at least 25% of raw as a puppy or sometime in their life, they were less likely to have environmental allergies, atopy, chronic GI problems, and there's one more category that I'm forgetting about. And so there is early evidence to suggest that possibly feeding at least 25% of we don't know if it's fresh, exclusive to raw, could be fresh, could enhance the immune function of that particular animal. So I wouldn't say we're a slam dunk should be doing it, but that could be why that even just a small percentage of feeding some raw or some fresh may be advantageous, and maybe that's why the company is spraying the raw on the kibble. But are they doing it well?
Right. I
And
mean,
how much of it's in there? Like how much is it even? Are you even getting close to that 25%?
right.
Who knows? Yeah, could be more marketing
Marketing.
baloney. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
yeah. So another pro that you can have with this is that raws can do kind of similar to home cooked, where it's a combination diet where you pick your ingredients and then you do a balancing um, vitamin and mineral mix that allows you to change the ingredients and do that desired variety that some people want, but still keep it balanced. So that's also an option that can be a pro with raw diets. Um, can you think of any other pros?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest ones is that
Oh,
it's less it's the most minimally processed diet out there,
wow,
potentially,
yeah,
depending
because
on
there's
how
no
the company
cooking.
is making it. So it's no
Right.
cooking. So we're potentially, again, it depends on how it was cooked. Not cooked, but depending on how it was made. It's one of the least processed forms
Right.
of the food. Hopefully it has been ground up and, processed a little bit, not totally unprocessed. People think raw is unprocessed. It's usually not. But it is minimally processed. And so it's going to have a really high antioxidant load. And it's going to have a lot more, if it's well formulated, it could have a lot of diversity within its ingredients and nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's been tested to have feeding trials behind it, then we'll know the bioavailability and digestibility of those nutrients. And so it could be really wonderful to be feeding our animals, and also could have a lower advanced glycation end product
Right.
in the diet. And this is
Yeah.
where I did some of the most early pilot studies in the US. I'd noticed a trend coming out of Europe in my fellowship, of some of these AGE studies, and they're starting to look at the levels of advanced glycation end products, which that's the Maillard reaction, the Maillard. I'm
Yeah.
not French, so I'm not saying it appropriately, but it's what makes meat delicious. It's the interaction between the carbohydrate and the protein that makes that glazed, caramelized, delicious flavor, which we like to eat it. The pets like to eat it. Grilled meat's very high in AGEs, but we know that, we are, in human medicine, it's recommended that we don't eat all of our meats grilled, or we don't eat grilled meat every day, and kind of use it as a treat. We don't necessarily can't draw the parallel to say that pets should follow the same advice, but it is something to consider. And there are ongoing studies being funded by one, not some. I wish there was some. It was plural. There is one
Right.
pet food company who is doing research on it. Everybody else is just spewing dogma.
Dogma.
Dogma. So thank you to that one pet food company who is doing it well. That is Instinct Pet Food Company, who is actually investing to look into the science behind raw. Most of them are not. So that is, I would say, maybe one of the biggest pros in talking about it
Yeah,
is,
I agree.
and it's been around for a long time, right? Like raw's been around for a while, and it's not going anywhere. It's maybe gaining in popularity. And if it truly had no benefit, I think it would be
Mm,
gone by now.
I agree.
I think
And
if there was
you
no
know,
benefit at all,
yep.
it would have just died out. I don't think, and you hear so many, it's called anecdotal evidence. So many pet owners are just touting the benefits of going on raw, and how amazing it is, and how much better their does, and how much more vibrancy it's added to their life. And I don't think they're lying. And I don't necessarily always even think it's just placebo effect. I think there is maybe something going on with that particular dog that is
Yeah,
responding to that diet. And would they do as well on a cooked diet? I don't know. As the raw, I don't know.
right. And we can't, if we're not going to vilify commercial kibbles
Hmm.
and things like that,
Yep,
this I would say would be on the other side of the spectrum.
exactly. And we're
So if
not going to vilify
we're
it.
not going to vilify this one either, because they literally exist for the same reason. If they were
Yep.
really that dangerous and really that bad, then they wouldn't be here anymore.
Mhm.
So there are pros and cons, or opportunities and wins, I guess,
Yeah.
with both.
But to be
Uh,
fair, raw does carry more risk
it does.
because it doesn't
It
have the kill
does.
step. And that leads perfectly into the challenges.
Yes. But this is my thing with raw is that it doesn't have to have all of these challenges. There is a way to get away from these challenges, and I just wish more companies would follow this.
Yep.
And so we'll get into it. So the biggest
Mhm.
one is there is a higher risk for bacterial or pathogenic contamination, which can cause severe illness in some pets. So especially the immunocompromised guys.
Mhm.
This is not a diet that I would feel comfortable feeding a severely immunocompromised pet.
Mm-mm.
Um, I have personally seen this happen. In dogs have severe E. coli infections. A couple puppies I've seen, so it does happen. I know there are some people out there that say that it's not true, that E. coli is naturally occurring in their colon, that it's a myth. Um, I've seen it in clinic. It's devastating.
We all
Um,
have, right? It's not
yep,
just one.
and
And
I've
they'll tell
even
you it doesn't happen. It does.
yeah,
And every
it,
veterinary
it
professional,
yeah,
especially in a specialty setting,
yes.
whether it's a technician assistant, a specialist nutritionist, an internist, a criticalist, we have all had multiple patients die
Yes.
from foodborne illness. So it's
Yep.
not, I wouldn't say it's common,
Right.
but it happens and it's preventable.
It is. And so the other thing about this is that these pathogens can be passed on to humans. They're
Mhm.
not just infecting the dogs or the cats that are eating the food. Um, so that can also have some devastating effects if you have little ones, or an immunocompromised family member or whatever. Um, this this is a real problem as well, is having your family become infected with these pathogens. So that this is the most serious point that a lot of veterinarians are trying to make. But like we said, there can be a kill step in formulating these diets. And so this is what I mean when I say I wish more companies would follow this, because you can still have the health benefits or whatever the philosophies are feeding this way, and remove this risk to a lesser degree. Um, and so it is one of the things that concerns us. The other thing is that this can be a form of feeding that is also it also has a high likelihood of being unbalanced. So same thing, get a recipe off the internet. And you think that it's balanced, and it's very likely not. There are even some commercial diets out there that are not balanced. I have had companies tell me that they don't formulate to AFCO standards because AFCO standards are only for extruded and like canned diets. I've literally had a company tell me that
Several. Oh yeah, no,
that
that's
they
circulating out there.
right.
Yeah.
So they don't balance because it's not possible to
Yeah.
follow those guidelines with raw, which is complete BS.
Mhm. Yep. They
um,
still need nutrients,
yep.
whether it's raw or kibble.
Right,
Still need the nutrients. So
right.
what are they following?
Exactly. Nothing. They're following
The,
nothing.
the magical food fairy recommendations? Wouldn't that
Yep.
be nice? Wish I had
Yeah.
that magic wand.
Yeah, me too. Um, the other thing that me working in internal medicine that I have seen my fair share of are things like when they're fed whole bones. These can either fracture the dog's teeth or cat's teeth, and worse, cause intestinal foreign bodies. So, or even perforations. So, these foreign bodies, they get stuck in the intestine and they can't move any further. They could get stuck anywhere in the esophagus even. I've had plenty of those as well, where the bone is just stuck in their esophagus. And it causes severe damage or perforation, where the perforation, then that's a very serious emergency. Um, so this is also a risk
Hmm.
when feeding whole bones, or carcasses even, um, like the
Fractured teeth. That can
yeah,
happen a lot with
and so the fractured
bones.
teeth,
Yep.
I have my own personal story about that, giving my dog just a bone, thought it was fine, and she got a slab fracture
Hmm.
on, her teeth. Like,
Yeah,
it happens all the time, it is
happens.
very common, and it is very expensive to fix.
It is very
And
expensive. And there are some people that will say that you need to be feeding some like a bone that's big so the animal can't have as much of a like top to bottom effect. But I'm not so sure. I'd love to we'll maybe get some veterinary dentists on and or do a
maybe,
poll
yeah.
and see how many slab fractures because I think you could still cause a slab fracture with like a giant like even if they
That's what
can't get their
Asla
whole
had.
mouth around it.
It was
Like
a
they'll
big,
still
like, femur bone,
yeah.
and she was
Yeah.
just chewing on it, and she kinda
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
looked and just gone off the size of her
Yeah.
carnassial, I think that's how you say
Yep.
it.
Gotcha. Yep.
So it was a big bone. It was
Yeah.
not a bone I was
And
worried
that's a
about
dogma
her.
that's perpetuated in the holistic spaces. If you
Yeah,
just feed a big enough bone, you won't get the slab fractures.
no. And she
Nope,
was
you could
young
still
too,
get
that's the
them.
other thing. She was
Yeah.
not an old dog where her teeth were starting to get, nasty. She was, like, 2 or 3.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
like, that's also, anyway, so those are
Yeah.
risks.
Yep.
The foreign body one is my scariest one personally. I mean, not that the bacterial one isn't scary, but, like, God, I've been scarred from some of those cases, so that's
Mhm.
always my biggest fear there. And then
Which if you were an ER tech, your biggest concern would probably be the patients that you watch die
yeah,
and held the owner's hand from a salmonella or E. coli or
yeah,
foodborne. Yeah.
yep, totally depends
Yeah.
on where
So it's real, right?
everyone
And
has
that's
different
why
traumas based on where they worked.
exactly where their primary area of focus
Yeah,
is, right? And
yeah,
how many of these animals are getting that are is is it common? Our dogs and cats, I think a little bit maybe more able to tolerate a higher bacterial load than people. I think that's true.
oh, yeah, I agree.
How like, for example, like dogs do gross things all the time all day. And
Yeah, like,
I
they
went to
eat
vet
poop
school in Wisconsin and you're right, and the placenta and poop and
with their
however,
butt,
when it does happen, and it
lick
can
each other's
happen in
butts.
yeah, it can happen in healthy animals. Like I've seen it happen in otherwise
Yeah,
healthy animals where they're not immune compromised. They should be able to tolerate fine, but they can't. And for some reason they get really sick. And maybe it's because there's a higher bacterial burden in the product because the pet food
yep,
companies aren't testing it because they're thinking that dogs and cats don't get salmonella. They absolutely do. And
yes.
my whole issue is the chain of command too. Like when it comes to raw food companies, is I've heard holistic veterinarians say, well, if it was so bad and so dangerous, wouldn't there be more dead cats out there because cats go out and hunt their prey and eat it? It's like, well, that's fresh kill. That's a fresh kill. The stuff
Yeah.
that people are making at home and that they are um,
Yeah,
buying from the stores are not
you
fresh.
didn't just go out in your
So
backyard and
yeah, I
slaughter
mean,
the
they're fresh,
animal
but they're
and
not
bring it
as
into the
fresh kill.
kitchen.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So you have the chain of command issue where it goes from how it's slaughtered, and that's another conversation we'll have. And I won't even go into it now, but how the animal slaughtered can increase the bacterial burden, and there's lots of ways that you can mitigate the risk in raw feeding and
yeah,
potentially get some of the same benefits. And it really just all comes down to how risk adverse the client is. And I believe that our
yeah,
clients should be, our job as medical professionals are to present the risks and the pros and
yeah,
cons of the different options and the costs, and then let people decide. It's called informed consent. You can actually get in really
yes,
big trouble for not doing this now, is not giving
yeah.
people informed consent and letting them know about the side effects of the even medications or procedures or supplements. Everything in life
But
has a risk, right?
sometimes
Like,
even the pros and the positives to some of these things, and for me, this is a little bit of a thing that bothers me because I'm pregnant, and it seems, that there are times where you're only presented with the negative side.
yeah.
And you're not
Mhm.
presented with what's the positive side if
Right.
I don't do this, because sometimes there are positive sides to not doing something,
Oh, for
um,
sure.
or positive sides to doing something, and caretakers or
Oh,
practitioners
this
will
is
withhold
where,
that information trying to
yep.
manipulate an answer, and that happens a lot, I do think, in veterinary veterinary medicine, because they don't feel comfortable with your choices, so they're gonna withhold information from you so that, you know you choose what they are comfortable with.
Or for, generosity of assumptions, I think it's that they're afraid. They don't want to get
Yeah.
sued. They don't want to cause harm. And if they
Yeah.
don't, and nutrition is not something that is well taught across the board in all veterinary schools. There are some veterinary schools that do an incredible job and
Right.
have functional and amazing clinical nutrition services. Unfortunately, not all of them are. And I think, pet consumers, I would love it to start put more pressure on veterinary schools to have functional clinical nutrition services, or be consulting with nutritionists that can come in and give more non-branded nutrition educations, because I think not having these conversations with clients is doing more harm than good. And I do wish that my colleagues, who maybe they're not comfortable talking about raw, maybe they're not comfortable recommending raw, at least send them to me, right? Send them to us,
Right.
who will help them,
Like,
help talk to the
you're
client
not
about how to mitigate that risk,
you're not the end
because
of the
they're going to
road,
do it anyway. Yep.
right?
And
Like,
then,
there's
yep, they're
always
going to,
gonna be someone where you can send them somewhere, and that's part of your due diligence, in my
mhm,
opinion, as a practitioner or a vet or a tech or whatever. Like, you don't have to know all the answers, but it is a bit of your responsibility to be able to send those
mhm,
people, those clients, to someone who does.
mhm,
And I think
to
that sometimes
discuss
that's
the
the step that's missed, is
pros and
that
cons and risks.
thanks again, everyone, for tuning in to the Guaranteed Analysis podcast. We really appreciate you tuning in every week to hear what we have to say about companion animal nutrition. Tune in next week for a special podcast on vet techs and why we're not just vet techs. As always, I hope your day is filled with love and kindness, heavy purrs and wagging tails. Stay kind, everyone.